Shane Arden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Always interesting to follow along from the heartland, rural New Zealand, behind a speaker like that, and someone who is actually in the export industry and in the agricultural sector as well. And clearly there are some inflationary pressures on that export sector. But what is the answer? That is the question. What is the answer? Tinkering at the edges in the way suggested by those who have just entered into the debate clearly is not the answer, Mr. Speaker. And when you look at what is being achieved, what is tangible, Mr. Speaker, and what can be measured, when you talk about after-tax wages being up by 20% since 2008, when you talk about the lowest inflation since 1999, when you talk about the lowest interest rates in 45 years, Mr. Speaker, these are measurable, tangible actions taken by a government, not a lot of hot air and puffery from those that have had their chance, their day in the sun, and achieved nothing in their time. But, Mr. Speaker, I see a major threat on the horizon, if you like, to the growth of the New Zealand economy. I see a major threat, and it is the misinformation, the lack of understanding, the inability to want to read and understand some of the concerns that are facing our major export industries, like some of the things that we've read and seen in the recent times, such as a submission by the Environment Commissioner, for example, to the recent Select Committee process on the introduction of the ETS bill into that Select Committee, suggesting that agriculture should be included in an emissions trading tax, based on an assumption, Mr. Speaker, that approximately 50% of New Zealand's greenhouse gas comes from that sector. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know that you know, probably better than anyone in this House with your education, that is demonstrably challengeable. It is absolutely challengeable. In fact, the science around that is substantially flawed. And, Mr. Speaker, to continue repeating the lie that was generated by the previous government and continued ever since, that up to 50% of our greenhouse gases come from the agricultural sector, when over the time since that was first commented on, that information has been...
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallett.
Mr. Speaker, the only reason for taking this point of order is to underline and make clear what has just been said, and to say that pursuant to the discussions which occurred in and out of the House yesterday, I'm pleased that the new standards are being applied.
He called us liars. He called us liars.
Order. He did not accuse any particular member, of lying. The member shouldn't. He referred to an issue as being a lie. That is totally different context. And the members shouldn't interrupt a 5-minute speech. Shane Arden.
The member knows no better, Mr. Speaker, and has consistently and regularly done that.
Order, point of order, the Honourable Trevor
And
Mallett.
not to break up the speech, sir, but just to ask the member, once you have ruled, not to comment on your ruling, as he just did.
Order, the member is breaking up his speech now. It doesn't help the good order of the House. Shane Arden.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will refrain from commenting in response to that and say, look, here is a member that was in the House yesterday crying crocodile tears over the closure of schools in Christchurch, when he closed more schools in Taranaki with one stroke of a pen than any member in this House. And there was no justification for that. So, Mr. Speaker, that member knows no different, has always been the same. And, Mr. Speaker, that is about where I'll leave that. So, going back to the issue of climate change and environmental effects brought about by our primary sector, Mr. Speaker, it would be so helpful to this debate and so helpful to the economy of New Zealand if at some stage a few facts were introduced into the discussion. And so far, Mr. Speaker, there have been a range of events in this discussion that have not been able to substantiate those facts. Mr. Speaker, if we do accept, and I don't, that 50% of the greenhouse gas from New Zealand comes from agriculture, and it certainly is challengeable in science, then, Mr. Speaker, what would introducing a tax on that achieve in terms of climate change? What would it achieve? What it would do is it would drive production from one of the most efficient production systems offshore. So therefore you would have those levels of production being produced in countries that have higher greenhouse gas emissions from their production systems and less production in New Zealand. Explain to me, Mr. Speaker, how that would help the New Zealand economy, given the dependence of the New Zealand economy on agricultural exports. Mr. Speaker, it is without the slightest bit of rationale or logic that we would introduce a tax on greenhouse gas emissions from our agricultural sector. And those that promote that clearly have no interest in watching New Zealand Inc. improve or grow, have no interest in improving the standard of living of New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Mr. Speaker, Women's Suffrage Day celebrates